Before it all fell apart, there was a quiet sort of love between us, or at least, that's what I told myself. Her name was Rachel, and when we met, I was pulled in by the magnetism of someone who never seemed to doubt herself. Confident, articulate, fierce. She talked about emotional intelligence, meditated every morning, and curated her life like an art piece. I mistook control for strength, passion for depth. In hindsight, I confused certainty with stability, and ignored what I should have seen all along. I was Daniel, the laid-back one. A walker, a thinker. I worked in design, freelance gigs, lots of hours on the laptop. My life wasn't curated, it was lived. I liked black coffee, dusty books, and long walks in the early evening. We were opposites, and that made it feel like balance. She needed control, I offered calm. She overplanned, I flowed. But balance only works when both people are standing on stable ground. And Rachel, well, Rachel needed control like oxygen. And I didn't realize how suffocating that need would become until it was too late. The first major red flag came 3 days after our daughter was born. We were still in the hospital. Rachel's mother, Elaine, a stern woman with pursed lips and cold eyes, had flown in for the birth. I was holding our newborn, swaying gently as the nurses cleared up breakfast trays. Rachel was asleep, or pretending to be. Elaine walked in and said, without a hint of hesitation, "She'll sleep in my room tonight." I blinked. No, she won't. She sleeps with us. She needs a good night's rest. You two won't get it. It's better this way. I looked at my daughter, who was barely 48 hours old, and then at Elaine. It's not happening. What came next was a silence so sharp it could cut glass. Elaine walked out, and Rachel woke, or again, pretended to, and turned on me. "You embarrassed her," she snapped. I stood there stunned. "Rachel, I'm not giving our newborn to your mother to sleep alone. That's not healthy." But I'd crossed an invisible line. I'd told her no. What I didn't know then, what I'd come to understand through painful hindsight, is that for someone like Rachel, boundaries are violence. Refusing her reality was an act of war. The moment I asserted myself, the foundation of our partnership cracked. The next few months were blurry with sleep deprivation and new parent stress. I tried to hold things together. I took night shifts with the baby so Rachel could sleep. I cooked, cleaned, changed diapers, handled doctor visits. But it didn't matter. She was angry, icy, withholding. She micromanaged everything I did, from how I swaddled to how I walked the stroller down the sidewalk. When I objected, she'd accuse me of being negative, of not aligning with her energy. Eventually, I stopped pushing back. I let her mother come over every day. I let her rearrange the nursery without asking. I let myself disappear. The fracture widened with time. I started walking more, miles a day, just to clear my head. She called it avoiding the family. I drank coffee at random times just to stay awake. She said it was erratic behavior. Every choice I made was twisted into dysfunction. I'd never felt so watched. So wrong. Then came the day I found out she'd seen a lawyer. No fight. No conversation. No warning. I came home from a morning walk to find Rachel's things mostly gone. A few hours later, a sheriff served me emergency custody paperwork. Her claim: I was mentally unstable, unfit to parent, neglectful, potentially violent. I dropped to the floor when I read the words. I couldn't breathe. Our daughter, Maya, was barely 1. And she was gone. The first supervised visit was in a pastel-colored room that smelled like Lysol and tears. They handed Maya to me like I was a stranger. No warmth. No trust. Just an exchange. Cold and procedural. A woman with a clipboard sat in the corner and wrote things down every time I spoke, smiled, or picked up a toy. I held Maya close, whispering her name like a prayer. She cried for 10 minutes straight, not because she didn't know me, but because she did. And this wasn't right. The monitor, Cynthia, was kind in a restrained way. It's normal, she said. Babies feel the tension. I wanted to ask how normal it was for a father to be ripped from his child's life because he drank coffee inconsistently or liked to walk. But I didn't. I just nodded. What followed was a series of indignities I wouldn't wish on my worst enemy. Court-mandated co-parent counseling. Psychological evaluations. A forced relocation to be closer to the monitored visitation center. I lost my freelance clients because I couldn't meet deadlines or take calls without sobbing. My reputation crumbled. My savings disappeared. Meanwhile, Rachel, still in our home, was repainting the nursery and posting inspirational quotes on Instagram about protecting your peace. She never once explained why she'd gone nuclear. No text, no call, no confrontation, just war. I later found out she told friends and family that I was dangerous, narcissistic, and emotionally abusive. Her evidence that I had a dark energy and resisted co-sleeping with her mother. It would have been laughable if it wasn't so devastating. I began to document everything. Every interaction. Every message. I printed emails, recorded court dates, and wrote in a journal every night until my hand ached. I knew the truth would matter eventually. Not today, not tomorrow, but someday. I held on to that belief like it was the last piece of driftwood in a storm. In counseling, Rachel refused to speak directly to me. She spoke to the therapist instead, saying things like, "He's mentally unstable." Everyone agrees. When pressed for examples, she offered things like, "He listens to music while washing dishes." Loudly. I began to realize, she didn't believe the things she was saying, she needed to believe them. Because if I was stable, if I was loving, if I was a good father, then what did that make her? That was the unbearable question she would do anything to avoid. I stopped hoping for apologies. Stopped fantasizing about reconciliation. The man who had once looked at her and thought, "This is my person," was gone. What replaced him was a father who had nothing left to lose but his daughter, and that I would never surrender. Family court is not built for the truth, it's built for performance. And in performance, Rachel thrived. She showed up in pastel dresses and talked about safety and concern. Her voice was calm, measured. Her attorneys spoke for her like priests interpreting holy text. Meanwhile, I stood there hollowed out, eyes sunken from sleepless nights, my heart thumping so hard it felt audible. The judge didn't know that I had spent the night before sobbing into a sweatshirt that still smelled like Maya's baby shampoo. They didn't care that I was living in a friend's spare room and eating instant noodles. The court didn't want pain. It wanted posture. Rachel filed motion after motion. Emergency orders, declarations, requests for evaluations. Her lawyers played chess while I played survival. They accused me of everything under the sun: neglect, instability, rage, paranoia. At one point, they even suggested that my refusal to install blackout curtains in my temporary apartment was a sign of negligence. I remember one hearing where her attorney said, "Your Honor, this father has no job and no permanent address. That is not a safe environment for a child." I wanted to scream. I had a job. I had a home. Until she torched my life. But you can't scream in court. Screaming is evidence. Instead, I took the beatings. I nodded. I documented. I rebuilt. I worked overnight shifts at a warehouse just to make enough to afford another attorney after my first one. A kind man named David told me he couldn't represent me without payment. I had to learn the law. I spent hours at the public law library reading case law on custody. I joined online forums filled with other broken fathers. Some were bitter, some enlightened, most exhausted. We traded advice like inmates trading food. That's where I learned how to request my visitation monitor's records. Cynthia had written beautiful, human things about me. Daughter is comforted in father's presence. Father is attentive, calm, and nurturing. Father reads books, plays gently, and consistently meets child's needs. Those notes saved me from drowning. They became my armor. Still, the humiliation continued. Rachel demanded a parenting coordinator, someone to serve as a permanent referee for our interactions. When asked why, she said, because he's mentally ill. Her evidence: I walked too much. I drank coffee, inconsistently. And, my personal favorite, I wore a size 10.5 shoe. You can't make this up, I whispered to my attorney. But apparently, you can. At one point, my daughter caught a cold. Rachel filed an emergency petition to suspend my visits, claiming I exposed Maya to danger. The judge dismissed it after reading medical notes showing Maya had caught the cold at daycare. But every false accusation chipped away at me. I stopped trusting Joy. I started flinching when my phone rang. I missed so many firsts. First steps. First words. First birthday. But I didn't give up. I couldn't. I'd look at the empty crib in my room and remind myself, she needs to know I fought. She needs to know I never gave up on her. I rebuilt my finances brick by brick. I found remote work with a startup that understood my schedule. I rented a small but clean apartment near Maya's daycare. I created a binder with hundreds of pages of proof, photos, emails, receipts, therapist notes, school reports. And still, Rachel fought to deny me time with my own child. Why? Because if I was stable, then she wasn't the hero in her story. And Rachel would burn the earth before giving that up. The first shift came not in court, but in a hallway. It was late November. Another hearing. Another petition to reduce my visitation. I stood outside the courtroom, silent, suit a little too tight around the collar. Rachel's attorney passed me without a glance, but Rachel lingered. She looked at me for half a second too long. Not angry, not smug, just tired. Her eyes darted away as if I'd seen something I wasn't supposed to. Cracks in the armor. Exhaustion behind the fury. It made sense. By then, she had spent over $180,000 in legal fees. All to avoid a conversation. All to avoid a truth. Back inside the courtroom, the judge, Hon. Marlowe, a stone-faced man with kind eyes if you really looked, was clearly losing patience. I'm seeing repeated accusations that don't line up with the evidence, he said, flipping through the latest stack of declarations. We have visitation monitors, counselors, pediatricians. None of them raise concerns about the father's mental health. Rachel's attorney shifted in her seat. I stayed still. This was new. The judge was speaking directly to her. He continued, if this is about control, or unresolved emotional conflict, that cannot be resolved in this courtroom. This is a custody matter, not a therapy session. For the first time in nearly a year, I let myself believe I might win. The judge ordered a third-party custody evaluator. Someone neutral, someone trained. Rachel fought it hard, claimed it was Unnecessary. Said the cost would be burdensome. But the judge didn't budge. Enter Dr. Stelina Wien, a no-nonsense psychologist who believed in facts, not theatrics. She interviewed me 3 times. Spoke with Maya's teachers. Reviewed therapy notes, supervised visit logs, and court transcripts. She visited my apartment, met my neighbors, asked what music I played for Maya, what bedtime looked like. She was thorough. And she was unimpressed with Rachel's narrative. In her report, a 72-page document that I've practically memorized, she wrote, greater than, there is no psychological evidence suggesting Daniel is unfit to parent. His bond with his daughter is secure and nurturing. He exhibits emotional stability, insight, and willingness to co-parent. And then the line that changed everything. Greater than, it is my professional recommendation that Daniel be granted 50-50 physical and legal custody, effective immediately. I wept when I read those words. Not just for me, for Maya. For every bedtime story we would now get to finish. For every morning pancake. For the fact that I wouldn't have to explain to her, someday, why Daddy disappeared. Because I hadn't. I had just been buried under lies. And now, finally, the truth had started to dig me out. Rachel was livid. She tried one last motion. Something about new information and safety concerns. It was vague and panicked. The judge rejected it within 10 minutes. Her case had collapsed under its own weight. And now, I was free. Not free from pain. Not free from the damage. But free to parent my child. Free to be a father again. The final custody hearing was quiet. Anticlimactic, almost. No fireworks. No screaming matches. Just paper, signatures, and a single sentence from Judge Marlowe that ended a war. This court hereby grants joint legal and physical custody to both parents, with a 50-50 shared schedule effective immediately. I didn't cry in that moment. I thought I might. But instead, I just exhaled, slow and deep, like someone surfacing from a year underwater. Rachel looked down at the table. She didn't speak. She didn't make eye contact. She simply stood, gathered her purse, and walked out. As if she hadn't spent over $180,000 to avoid this very outcome. As if the past year of accusations and emotional scorched earth tactics had been a bad dream she now refused to remember. But I would remember. I had to. Because Maya would one day ask. She'd ask why her first year was fragmented. Why photos of me disappear after month 4. Why her father's voice is only heard in monitored rooms with stuffed animals and one-way glass. And when she does, I will look her in the eye and say, because I told someone no. Because I set one boundary. And because someone else decided that was unforgivable. But I'll also say, I never gave up. I fought with everything I had, and everything I didn't, because loving you was never the question. Only the answer. Our new schedule began the next week. The first night Maya slept at my place, she curled up next to me with her blanket clutched under her chin. She reached for my hand and whispered, "Daddy, stay." I swallowed a boulder of grief and joy and nodded. Always, baby. Always. And I meant it. We built new rituals, just the two of us. Saturday pancakes. Pajamas and jazz on Sunday mornings. She learned to say, "Good morning," to the plants we watered on the balcony. I let her pick out her own cereal. We took long walks and named dogs we passed. Mr. Biscuit, Captain Noodle, Sir Barkington. It wasn't perfect. She still asked about the big house, and sometimes she cried at drop-offs. There were days when the grief hit her in waves she didn't yet know how to name. But children are wiser than we think. She felt the steadiness in me. the safety, the love, and she bloomed. Rachel never apologized. Not once. She still makes communication difficult. She's curt in emails, passive aggressive during exchanges. But the court sees through her now. The narrative has shifted, and she knows it. She lost more than custody that day in court. She lost the ability to control the story. And in a strange way, I'm grateful. Because the man I was before this, he's gone. He needed to go. The man who stands now, broke, bruised, but unbowed, is someone Maya can look up to. Someone who knows what it means to fight for love in a world built to misunderstand fathers. For the ones still fighting. To the fathers still in the war. Document everything. Speak only facts. Control your tone, even when you want to scream. Never text angry. Never show fear in court. Let the lies bury themselves. They always do. You will feel alone, like no one sees you. But the truth moves. Slowly, quietly, then all at once. And when it does, you will stand taller than you ever imagined. Not because you won, but because you didn't surrender. And that's what your children will remember.